It's a book of essays with poems in them that are all about what happens when you travel around the country with a typewriter, writing poems for people based on what they ask for poems about. And here's a little bit from it, so it's going to be a little narrative-y. But it starts with a poem. This is from The First Stranger, which is the first chapter. And the epitaph is, "When you are grown, no part of you will be recognizable. Will you tend the garden of yourself? Do you dare brave the soil?" I sat behind a borrowed Smith Corona manual typewriter with sticky keys at a street party in downtown Los Angeles. The year was 2012, and I had recently returned to California from college abroad, another unemployed millennial at the tail end of the financial crisis, looking for a purpose, but willing to settle for moving out of his parents' house. The pounding summer heat of the street party was broken by the shade of skyscrapers, glass citadels to wealth and power that towered over everyone. A new metro line had just been built in this car-powered city, and everyone was celebrating at the grand opening of the latest station. Naturally, to get there, I drove. Helicopter moms buzzed around their children, paleteros called hielos and pushed ice cream carts, and a homeless man shouted himself hoarse and broke down on the street corner at all these people in his living room. LA was in the middle of a homelessness crisis, a gentrification crisis, a transportation crisis. LA was perpetually in the midst of these crises. Next to me at a DJ booth, powered by solar panels, Pharrell Williams' Happy was playing. I was nervous, palms sweating as I set out a Costco tray table and folding chair. Another birthday in my sputtering adulthood had passed, and I had a leftover length of blue wrapping paper that I made into a sign. Poetry store. Give me a topic, I'll write you a poem. Pay me what you think it's worth. Just a week before, I'd heard a story on the radio about someone selling poems in the park, and with an invitation to do something at the street party and the yearning only a 22-year-old can have to make a good impression, I thought I might as well give it a try. What's the worst that can happen? I reasoned with my terror. No one stops and I write poems for myself in public like a weirdo and go home. I've been a weirdo before, I can do it again. I took a picture on my iPhone of the typewriter and reluctantly put it back into my pocket, shoving down the urge to Facebook, to text, to be anywhere but here on the hot and crowded street corner surrounded by strangers with an open invitation for any one of them to come up and talk to me. I idly typed on a piece of paper to calm my nerves. No sooner had I started writing than people drifted over, curious to see the typewriter and then bemused at the prospect of finding a self-proclaimed poet behind it. "Do you need a poem?" I asked them. I wore a hat like armor. I wasn't me, I told myself. I was the character of a poet. If people rejected me, they weren't rejecting me, they were rejecting this character I was playing. But they stopped almost immediately. Old folks to reminisce over the typewriter, curious kids and their parents, couples on dates. I asked each of them the same question. Do you need a poem? "I don't have any money," replied a buzz-cut Chicana woman with tattoos peering out wherever clothing met skin. "That's okay," I replied. "About my dad, then?" Her answer was instant. He was a long-haul trucker when my brothers and sisters and I were growing up, so he wasn't around much. She drifted into stories of her dad, her family, reminiscing about her life and relationships to a complete stranger on the street while throngs of people passed. My dad would be gone for weeks at a time, but he'd do it to send money home, she told me. I just want him to know that I understood, and that we loved him for it. She stopped and stood in silence. I wondered if this story was a weight she'd been carrying for a long time. My fingers struggled to muster enough force on the rusty keys of the typewriter in front of me to smash the tiny hammers into the ink ribbon and onto paper, As I typed each line, the typewriter would skip ever perilously closer to the edge, threatening to topple off. I'd have to pause and wrestle it back, turn the knob, pull the carriage back, and start a new line. The C stuck. The space bar sometimes skipped and left 2 spaces. Any hope I had at formatting the thing was gone. It would format itself, thank you very much. My index fingers labored over the keyboard, each keystroke an exclamation of permanence. I didn't keep any pictures of the poems I wrote back then, so I'll never know what the first poem I wrote for a stranger said. I remember images of semi-truck side mirrors, endless lonely roads buoyed by thoughts of family back home. I remember reading the poem to this fierce woman, peeking up to see her eyes closed. It was a first draft, imperfect, riddled with the errors of a 60-year-old machine and a 22-year-old poet. But it was hers. At the end, she took a deep breath in, then opened her eyes to look at me. She took her poem, expression inscrutable. "Wait here," she said, and vanished into the crowd. I moved on to write for someone new, a middle-aged woman in festive summer clothes who fawned over photos of her dog with me at the typewriter. But then the trucker's daughter reemerged from the mass and pressed a crisp bill into my hand. I had to go to an ATM, she told me by way of explanation. Her tone was gruff, but I could see something had softened in her face. The trucker's daughter didn't look like she had much, but her $5 was much more than $5 to an unemployed kid looking for something to hold on to. It was an affirmation. In this world bound by money and scarcity, this world where it's hard to find the words to tell someone how you feel, what you mean. She was sending me a message. What you are doing is worth something.